Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Angela Benham and today I'm doing the Altenew July 2023 Inspiration Challenge using 3 colors that have been chosen, and I'm using the Build-A-Garden Grand Carnations stamp set to do this. I do 2 versions of this. I do one using the layered stencils and do some ink blending, which I really enjoy doing. And the second one, I don't use the stencils. I just use the stamp sets and do watercolor. Wet and wet technique, which I start off a little slowly, but then I get to it. For both sets, I use the same composition of stamping using some masks that I created by stamping the stamp images onto masking paper and fussy cutting it. Now these masks can be reused. There are 5 stencils. 4 of the stencils are to color the images of the leaves and flowers, and they are really clearly numbered, and the alphabets are cross-referenced on the packaging of the stamp set as well, so it's very clear. And there's a 5th stencil for a background. For the first card, I stamped the image onto Neenah Solar white card, and I used the masking images or the masks that I created to do some overlapping. And I used the same composition for my second card, but I stamp it with embossing ink and use white embossing powder on watercolor paper, whereas on this card I stamp it on Neenah Solar white cardstock, and I stamp it with the obsidian pigment ink and use some clear embossing powder to ensure that the ink does not smear, but I also like the shine on the stamped images. So it takes a little while to stamp these images when I use the masks to create the composition that I want, but I do like creating more than one flower and have the flowers overlap so they look a little bit more natural. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And when you do subscribe, remember to press that notification bell so you're alerted when a new video is uploaded. There's a lot more information in my blog, and the link to my blog is in the description below, but I also have the products I've used linked in the description below. The alphabets against the flowers and leaves on the stamp packaging corresponds to the same alphabets that are on the stencils. And you've got A1, A2, B1, B2 to show the different layers of stencils for each of the images, be it the flowers or the leaves. So it's very easy to follow when you're doing your stenciling. I do like, however, so for example, the A1 is one big background silhouette of the first carnation. I do like to add a couple of different different colors. I do add a little bit of pink, and I think I add 3 shades of purple and a couple of shades of pink as well, I think. So it gives it a little bit more depth to the flower. And that's what I do for both the layers. In fact, most of the layers of the flowers and leaves, I do add more than one color to add a bit more depth to the image. To add these various colors, I have blending brushes. I have the small blending brush as well as the detailed blending brushes, and this allows me to apply colors to smaller areas and the right shades as well. So for each of these colors, these blending brushes, I only have one blending brush per color family, and I tend to use them interchangeably across all the hues of the colors, but it helps to clean the brush on either a scrap piece of paper or a scrap cloth before you use the next color, so it doesn't contaminate the shade that you want to apply. Because I'm also applying a couple of shades, I do tend to clean my stencil with a dry cloth so the colors are not contaminated, because I do want to have the pink and the purples quite distinct as rather than just blending them together. When I place these colors and apply these colors in the stencils, they do dry a little bit lighter. So it's okay to apply the colors a little bit more intense and darker because they will dry lighter. After this, what I do is I do some partial die cutting. Now to do this, I use the coordinating dies that come with the stem set. I use the Gemini Junior plates, but I put it through the Gemini die cutting machine, which is the larger Gemini die cutting machine. I happen to have both Gemini Junior and the Gemini die cutting machine. So the Gemini Junior plates in the Gemini die cutting machine really helps with this partial die cutting. So I die cut the leaf first because remember I did some masking and stamping, and then I used the die cut for the large carnation with the buds as well as the foliage. And I do another bout of partial die cutting where I only put the plates on the areas that I want die cut. So the rest of the card panel where the die is will not be cut because the plates don't go over it. So I do have a partially die cut image, and what I do is then I use a craft knife with a steel edged ruler and on a mat do a straight cut across that. So I've got a straight cut of the cut through the floral composition with part of it die cut following the shape of that flower and leaf. It's not perfectly cut. I then use my scissors to just cut off the slightly joined areas, and I have the areas cut that I want to. Now it is quite an unusual shaped card. It's about 5 by 6. I do use a 5 by 7 card and I just cut it down. So the card that I end up making is 4/7/8 by 5/7/8, which is quite an unusual shape. But no worries, I use a 5 by 7 card, cut it down, and I also use my envelope punch board to create a custom envelope for the card. I have details or pictures of these envelopes in my blog, and I also will link in the description below how I use my envelope punch board to create various envelope sizes to match the card. So I'm not really constrained to doing a particular type of card that I have the envelope size for, which is quite liberating. It's quite nice to do a card size that suits the image that you want to make rather than constrain to a particular card size that you have an envelope for. I just find the envelope punch board so easy to use to create any size of envelope or the quite many sizes of envelope that's listed on the punch board to create. And I do have many. You can get many 12 by 12 papers quite inexpensively in various thrift shops. the second card, as I mentioned earlier, I stamped the same composition using the masks as well as the stamps to create a composition that is stamped with embossing ink, and I heat embossed it with pure white crisp embossing powder on watercolor card because I'm going to use watercolors. And I used 3 colors from the Artist Watercolor 24 pan set to create various hues. I primarily used the wet on wet technique, where I put clear water onto the areas where I want to apply the wet pigment on. It takes me a little bit of a slow start here. Watercolors do scare me. There's many points during this card where I think I'm going to give up and ditch the watercolor composition here. In fact, at one point I asked my sons, does it look good? Should I just dump it? And they said, I think it looks good. You should give it a go. And that's what I've ended up with. Now, I'm not overly keen on the overall results because I think some parts of it is a bit too bright. But I just go with it. I persevere, and I think it's okay. But I know I can improve on my wet and wet technique and watercolor. Aram Tasnim, I see her do some loose watercoloring, wet and wet technique. She makes it look so easy. But I think more practice will really help improve the technique for myself anyway. I do hope you enjoy watching it though. So I do apply quite a few layers where I start off with a very light hue and I do let it dry and apply a few layers. Now I do let it dry quite naturally, but you could use a lower heat setting on your heat gun and dry it. But I didn't want to do that because I thought I might melt the embossing powder a bit too much. But I do stick with primarily these 3 colors to do the flowers and the leaves. I hope you enjoy watching it and give it a go, because I think the loose watercolor technique is something that I want to embrace more. So I think I'll be doing more of it just to see how it goes, because it's probably more the technique that is suited to me, because the specific or the very defined watercolor technique is not probably something I will go for unless I'm using some ink that is from ink pads. Watercolor, I find it a little bit harder to control when I do very specific. I find it easier to do loose watercolor techniques with watercolor paints. That's me anyway. used the same sentiment as well as the same pattern paper to finish the second card, but I used the pattern paper in a different way, as well as I used the coordinating die for the sentiment to show you there's a couple of different ways you can use the pattern paper as well as the sentiment. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And when you do subscribe, remember to press that notification bell so you're alerted when a new video is uploaded. Do head over to my blog where there's more information, and the link to my blog is in the description below. Happy crafting, and I'll catch you at my next video. Do take care.